Super. Okay, great stuff. So next up, I think it's okay. It's on the record. It's just on this screen that it looks like that. What people see online looks like this. Okay. So I'm very happy to welcome Erin McInerney, who has very recently become a docteur de sciences de langage and is affiliated to the LILPA Research Center with the Université de Strasbourg, who's going to talk to us more about Instagram, I imagine. And the floor over to you.
Bon, ça me fait un peu bizarre de changer de langue, mais comme je suis là, j'ai la plupart de mes données qui sont en anglais, donc ça me semble plus pertinent de faire la présentation en anglais, mais pour les personnes qui souhaitent poser des questions en français, il n'y a bien sûr pas de souci. So, today I will be working on a presentation called Mediatizing Café, Flore, as you can see, platformization, permission structures, and chronotopic play. I'll be playing on the social semiotic plan a little bit more today than the sociolinguistic, but of course it's informed by both. So in addition to the research questions that I will share presently, I have three aims that will be guiding the discussion today, as well as my sort of research in general at the moment. And that is to firstly critically engage with what is still an underrepresented platform in our discipline, as I just said, Instagram. And to critically examine the processes underpinning discourse production on this platform. And thirdly, to critically reflect on the transformation of labor flows that has occurred as a result of these interactions. So these are kind of my guiding prisms today. But in doing so, and more broadly, I also aim to explore how these interwoven processes emerge as indices of globalization and of a society whose economies are increasingly reliant on the commodification and mediatization of everyday life for their successful operation. So the questions I'll be kind of working with today revolve around the notion of how businesses engage with mediatized discourse of Instagram users for the purposes of diverse forms of profit. So firstly, what forms of profit flow from the mediatization and remediatization of discourse at the Café de Flore geotag, the site of inquiry today? Secondly, how are beliefs about these rewards or the rewards themselves indexed linguistically, semiotically, and or multimodally? And thirdly, kind of more broadly, how does the interactional context at the Café de Flore geotag support or negate the role of platformization in redefining social relationships through mediatized discourse? So just a brief outline of the presentation. I'll provide a bit of background on the sociolinguistic setting and research context, then offer a very brief review of some of the literature that has been helpful for me in theorizing this still emerging subfield. I'll also very briefly speak about my methods because sometimes people are quite curious about how to undertake research on a platform such as Instagram. Obviously, spending most time on the data and discussion before concluding with some final thoughts. So moving on to some helpful literature. Labor on social media has largely been explored from sociolinguistic ethnographic perspectives that have centered the discourse and meta-discourse of influencers, specifically vis-a-vis the work and social representations of content creation. And there are numerous factors that distinguish and isolate what has been called this aspirational labor from more traditional areas. Oh no, I've got this automatic timing on. That's not going to be helpful at all. We'll see what happens. Okay, from traditional areas of language and other visual work. On Instagram, we are looking at a high modality, densely mediated, and mediatized context. Let me see if I can get rid of these timings. That's a shame. Cool. We'll see what happens. All right. And so we've got some sources here, including Olivier Drody-Bousset, who I know has contributed to your seminar, Adam. And because of this, we know not only that an increased range of stylized resources are made available to speakers online, but that discourse, when it is packaged in these condensed forms of Instagram posts, can benefit from facilitated circulation online, and this promotes discourse uptake and elevates the visibility of the speaker. Yannis Androtsopoulos has called these recontextualization chains, and we'll see a few of these in the data, which index numerous sociolinguistic and social semiotic processes. These processes, combined with the consumer networks made available by the infrastructure of social media platforms, uphold what has now developed into the robust economy known as the creator industry, which is estimated today to be worth about 150 billion US dollars. So a very striking figure there. As I mentioned, against this backdrop, the production and construction of discourse on Instagram emerges phenomena embedded in both sociolinguistic and social semiotic processes. These speech acts, as I consider them, are also chronotopic in that they are meaningfully and materially tied to the affective postures of their authors and to specific instances of space-time in which they were created. However, the conditions of their reception are defined quite contrastingly by their delocalization and recontextualization. So we have some quite opposing forces there that come with how and where this is created versus how and where it is received. As I mentioned, my research examines these new labor flows and how they have been incorporated into the marketing and monetization models of Café de Flore, a 19th century Parisian dining establishment located in Saint-Germain on the left bank of the Seine. And this is a place that has been quite heavily mediatized on Instagram throughout the last 5 years. And what you've just seen there is a direct link from the Café de Flore website to its Instagram page, which it has created using this portmanteau Instaflore. Today, I'm looking and we'll be looking at this transformation as it has been accomplished by way of two very closely related processes. One, which I've taken a more sociolinguistic orientation, or I've employed a more sociolinguistic orientation, and the other, which borrows more from media studies in the United States. So the first is mediatization, which is used in media studies as well, but I've borrowed the definition from AGA, which is the one most frequently employed in sociolinguistic work, defined as, I'm sure many of you know, a process of communication upon a process of commodification. It's also being described as Olivia Joly-Bousset said, one of the most transformative processes in high modernity, along with the globalization, urbanization, secularization, and individualization. I really love that quote. And Yannis Androtsopoulos has also called it the process by which an off-online nexus emerges. And if you're not familiar with this term, it's used a lot in the work of linguistic landscape, and that is where he employs it as well. Platformization, as I mentioned, coming out of the cultural and media studies, I say of the United States, but not all of these scholars are American. It was developed first by Anne Hellman in 2015 in relationship to Facebook, but has been more recently popularized by the work of Nibour, Paul, and Duffy. And they describe it as the penetration of digital platforms, economic, infrastructural, and governmental extensions into the cultural industries, as well as the organization of the cultural practices of labor, creativity, and democracy around these platforms. So those are the two really critical processes that underpin what I'm studying broadly and what I'll be presenting today. In terms of my methods, which again, I will only speak very briefly about, these are the kind of two goals I had with them. The first, to exploit the scientific potential of Instagram's affordances to their absolute maximum. And the second, to destabilize the status quo that has promoted the use of APIs and bypassed uncomfortable discussions on ethics and data protection. I also aimed to look at these recurring themes in social media research, public-private boundary, platforms terms of use, participant consent, as well as data storage, dissemination, and anonymization. If you have students interested in doing research on these online platforms, this is the way I went about it. I developed an academic profile that listed and linked to my affiliations and allowed people to enter into contact with me, and largely consisted of my gathering posts using what's known as the collections function on Instagram, which exists in a private tab, and allowed me to gather posts collected by month to store them within the Instagram platform so as to avoid their export and certain issues with the GDPR, as well as follow their evolution through the kind of automatic counting feature essentially by Instagram. And if people have more questions about that, you can feel free to ask. So my data were gathered on the first day of every month of the year 2022 from the Café de Flore geotag. And you can see here how this data evolved over the year. In the final corpus, after it was cleaned and only cleaned very likely removing spam, totaled 404 posts. So those are, I'll be presenting a selection of data from those posts today. To begin, semiotic analysis of these data revealed that discourse converged around 4 dominant visual perspectives, which are presented here by order of frequency. The first being tabletop and or flat lay scenes, of which there were 184, in which a Café de Flore tabletop setup constitutes the primary scene of the photo or video, or figures prominently in the photo. And this perspective, as we'll see, was characterized principally by bird's eye view or flat lay shots. That's the name in the title there. The second were Café de Flore storefront scenes, of which there were 166, in which the Café de Flore kind of emblematic storefront is depicted as the main object or central backdrop of the photo. These were characterized contrastingly by high-angle shots or by straight shots, most frequently of its east-facing facade, the one that you see if you come out of the Saint-Germain metro station and you're heading east on Boulevard Saint-Germain. We have 3 other categories that I won't really be looking at today. In fact, I'll mostly be dealing with the first. These were other exterior scenes, other interior scenes, and other street or business signs, of which there were significantly less. So reading vertically, you can see examples of these dominant perspectives here: the flat lay or tabletop scenes, storefront scenes captured from different angles, other exterior scenes, and other interior scenes, some of which are perhaps more amusing than others. Throughout the corpus, users rely considerably on pretty stereotypical mainstays of French cafe culture to constitute their images, which included regularly introducing semiotic resources such as croissants, viennoiseries, baguettes, and hot drinks into their photo frame. And as such, they were considered to have a larger number of pre-selected, pre-positioned elements than storefront scenes, the other most common configuration in the corpus. And as you may begin to notice, the Café de Flore branding suite here is exerting a pretty palpable sense of dominance linguistically and semiotically through the sheer force of repetition and number, largely drowning out any other visible language that occupies space in or outside of the cafe's walls. And while some Instagram users had notably centered these elements as kind of grounding thematic force in their posts, the total collection of photos and videos in my corpus also conveyed the considerable difficulty of obfuscating these branded images, even in an online context where multiple resources could, in theory, allow us to do so. So the visual stability brought about by this ubiquitous branding thus immediately draws attention to any post that does not comply with these norms, painting it as an infiltrating, disruptive force, as we saw with the toilet or with this car. So given the various factors that I presented earlier that we have seen to inform the conditions of discourse production, which are as I said, quite varied. The homogeneity of these discourses in place, and I'm quoting Rob Scullin there, begs a bit of sociolinguistic or sociosemiotic explanation. Aga, in that same paper, says some forms of mediatized communication make links to commodity formations salient. Others don't. I think it's a really nice quote. It's not often used from that paper. And in the present context, it's critical to understand this making as an active process brought about by the interactions between the cafe and its patrons, rather than as a mere byproduct of this rather dense and very public form of mediated discourse. So I have opted to explain some of these phenomena borrowing from Jaffe's work on stance taking, and specifically describing geotagging as a form of stance taking. So broadly, stance taking has been described on Instagram as a strategy deployed for the exchange and accumulation of capital, broadly speaking, and for the performance of elite identities. However, it's not really being theorized through the geotagging affordance specifically. Sorry, please automatic tagging on here. Through geotagging, Instagram users engage in a form of chronotypic play in which they misrepresent the cafe's physical landscape as pristine, carefully ordered, and sparsely populated, recalling the semiotic erasure work of Irvine and Gall, also Kristen Thurlow and Adam Jaworski's work on elite spaces. And in adopting this geotagging mechanism, these individuals reassert and intensify the transactional relationship they established with the cafe on its physical premises. It's important to recall that geotagging can be situated as a form of stance taking because it is not an inherent feature of an Instagram post. When you add an Instagram post, a geotag is not automatically assigned. It's chosen. It can be prompted depending on which kind of interface you're using, but it's not an inherent feature. So it's absolutely a choice, and as I see it, a significant choice made by the user. So how is this transactional relationship, once it's established in these semiotic lines, negated or ratified by the other party in this relationship, the cafe itself? We see here the phrase liked by Café de Flore, which performs several metafunctions in this context. And I would like to look at one specific pragmatic function that I believe this is serving, and that is an endorsing mechanism, which through the like affordance, Café de Flore designates specific individuals as having appropriately ordered the resources to align with the cafe's visual and linguistic norms. And of equal importance is how this testifies to the cafe's practice of surveilling the discourse added to its geotag. So in fact, these seemingly innocuous likes ultimately position the cafe's invisible surveillance practices as a visible regime that classifies and hierarchizes discourse intended to represent a wide variety of experiences at the cafe. These and other practices at large in the data provide an insight into how the cafe, which has no explicit control in theory over the composition of its geotag, successfully manipulates and orients its representation in a user-generated context. The figure here further illustrates how the cafe sidesteps these restrictions typically associated with a user-generated environment. It begins, as you can see here, by selecting a small set of remediated photos tagged by individual users at the cafe. It then removes the captions associated with these posts originally and adorns them with new captions, and subsequently remediatizes these posts via its Instagram profile and its geotag for further uptake and dissemination. Other Instagram accounts, including this one here representing a Saint-Germain neighborhood, were also seen to follow this remediatization model, used by Café de Flore, which is revealed to be inherent to the organization and representation of its online presence. And when enacted at a large scale, as we can see here, these practices perpetuate an iterative cycle in which mediatized discourse is resemiatized, stripped of their authorship, and recursively extracted from their context of their production. So I've been thinking about how to describe this process. And the term I've come up with and sort of proposed in a very recent article published only this week is the notion of permission structures, which describe how consent to this type of recontextualization is or is not articulated in online mediated contexts. So geotagging and what I call social tagging, when you just put an @ and you name an Instagram user in your comments, have become equated with a form of tacit consent to remediatized uptake. In other words, if I upload a photo to Instagram, if I tag you in it, if I add a geotag, it is presumed that I'm giving my consent for this photo to then be used by the specific institution or person which I have named. So again, by deploying these affordances, users are assumed to be engaged in a bid for capital, the success of which is very much linked with attaining visibility and fulfilling specific algorithmic conditions. However, at Café de Flore, users' posts are blatantly and publicly repurposed to various economic ends. These draw in consumers in a very tactile way, while consent to this use is neither overtly nor meaningfully verifiable. So what kind of implications does this have for platform labor and for the sociolinguistic transformations of work? What I found is that thousands of users have created a free flow of labor at Café de Flore, recruiting and recontextualizing the business's emblematic landscape in exchange for the mere possibility of reaping what appeared to me to be very limited symbolic rewards, which would be simply obtaining a repost or a position on the cafe's individual Instagram profile. Meanwhile, these patterns of erasure, I'm so sorry about these timings, represent real and present economic profits for the cafe as patrons are drawn from various peripheries into the city center and used as a supply of labor and resources. And that's pulling from the work of Monica Heller and Alexandre Duchesne there. And so, unlike many businesses, Café de Flore has not established any kind of remunerative contract with Instagrammers or content creators, and yet they succeeded in mobilizing the discourse of everyday Instagram users as well as professional content creators to market their products in highly specific ways, eroding them of their chronotopic and authorship markers, and relying on a nested system of datification and platformization, as well as algorithmization, to obfuscate how this is achieved exactly. What we notice is that invariably these disparate voices are collapsing as they are formed around and ultimately dissolve into one grand representation of this space. It thus arises that while individuals may generate a picture of the establishments they frequent on Instagram, at a more abstract level, much of the power to control, recontextualize, and elevate signs in mediational spaces lies with the very businesses and platforms these individuals set out to represent. So short but sweet. Hopefully I've taken the timing. Sorry again about the slides, and thank you.